The Nevada sun was scorching hot. I stepped out onto the porch of my house with a cup of strong coffee, my only weakness these days. My house on the outskirts of Elko looked too spacious for a single man. 3 bedrooms, a living room overlooking the deserted hills, a kitchen where no one had cooked a proper meal in 5 years. Margaret had always said we needed a bigger house, for the grandchildren. Now those words sounded in my head like a cruel mockery of fate. I looked in the mirror before I left. Wrinkles scattered from my eyes like cracks in parched earth. 63 isn't such an advanced age, but when everything you've lived for has crumbled, time becomes a merciless loss counter. Eugene Cobb, I introduced myself to my reflection, owner of an industrial equipment repair company, a widower, and a father whose own daughter barely tolerates him. My shop was located in the Elko industrial area. Not such a big deal, but over 30 years I'd built a reputation as someone who could fix just about any piece of machinery within a 100-mile radius. In these parts, where mining companies and farmers depend on the reliability of their machinery, such a skill brought a steady income. Waiting for me in the shop was Grayson, my chief engineer and the only employee who'd worked with me for more than a decade. "Good morning, boss," he nodded, handing me an order folder. "The Golden Nugget Casino is having problems with the ventilation system again, and the guys at Gold Strike Mine are asking to see the pumping equipment." "Let's start with the casino," I replied, looking through the paperwork. "The owners always pay well, no delays." The workday went on as usual. I was immersed in a comprehensible world of mechanisms, where every problem had a solution and every detail had its place. If only human relationships could be repaired as easily as broken motors. On my lunch break, I stopped by the Ruby Horseshoe, a small cafe across the street from the workshop. Its owner, Shirley Fowler, greeted me as she always did. "Eugene, your usual turkey sandwich and coffee?" "Yes, Shirley, thank you." While I was waiting for my order, Betty Holder, an old acquaintance who used to work as a school counselor at the same school where my daughter Iris attended, came to my table. "Do you mind if I sit down?" she asked. "Of course not. Have a seat." Betty had always been one of the few people in Elko who hadn't avoided talking to me since Margaret died. She had a rare gift for talking about difficult things simply, without getting bogged down in fake sympathy. "What's up, Eugene? Haven't seen you in a while." "The usual, work, home, work again. How about you?" "Oh, I'm retired now, you know. More time for the grandkids. By the way, I ran into your Iris the other day at the bridal store. She was picking out wedding invitations." I froze with a cup of coffee in my hand. Something cold ran down my spine. "Wedding invitations?" Betty was suddenly embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you knew. She's engaged to some young man. Randall, I think. Said the wedding was this summer." I slowly set the cup down on the table. My only daughter is getting married, and I find out about it by accident from strangers. "No, I didn't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Iris and I haven't talked much lately." Betty put her hand on mine. "Eugene, I know how hard it's been for you since Margaret died. Iris was very young when it happened. Children often don't understand how parents deal with grief." 15 isn't a young age to not understand what's going on," I answered dryly. "Margaret died 15 years ago. Iris is 30 now. And in all those years, she'd never once tried to really talk to me. After lunch, I couldn't concentrate on work. My thoughts kept returning to Iris and her wedding. I remembered how she had sat on my lap as a little girl and we had read books together, how I taught her to ride her bike in the park, how Margaret joked that we had 2 children, Iris and me, because I often acted like a big kid around my daughter. And then came the disease. Cancer took Margaret in 6 months. 6 months of hell as I was torn between a dying wife, a business I couldn't quit, and a teenage daughter who withdrew into herself. I couldn't cope. Couldn't be a support for Iris. Dived into work to keep from going crazy with grief. I thought time would fix everything, that the pain would subside and we could be a family again. But time didn't fix anything. Iris went to college in Reno, then got a job there. Our rare holiday get-togethers turned into cold, formal dinners where we exchanged empty phrases. With each passing year, the gulf between us only widened. I knew Iris blamed me for my mother's death. If only you had noticed the symptoms sooner. If only we had gone to a different doctor. If only you had spent more time with Mom instead of at work. These phrases she never said out loud after the funeral, but I read them in her eyes. That evening, back home, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of Iris, from newborn to high school graduate. Pictures of our family when we were still happy. Margaret in her wedding dress, so young, so beautiful. "What would you do, Margot?" I asked the photograph. "How would you fix what I had broken?" I knew she would have said, "Just talk to her, Eugene. Open your heart." But how do you open your heart to someone who has slammed the door in your face? The next day, I called Iris. Expectedly, she didn't pick up. I left a message. "Hi, Iris. It's Dad. I heard about your engagement. I wanted to congratulate you and find out when the wedding is. Please call me back." She didn't call back. 3 days later, I tried again. Same result. A week after my conversation with Betty, I decided to take a different course of action. I found the address of the bridal salon Betty had mentioned and went there. The owner, Mrs. Henson, recognized me. Elko was a small enough town that most of the old-timers knew each other. "Mr. Cobb, what can I do for you?" "Good afternoon, Mrs. Henson. I'm looking for information about the wedding of my daughter, Iris. I understand she recently ordered invitations from you." The woman's face tensed slightly. "Yes, that's right, but I'm not sure I can discuss the details without her consent." "I understand, but you see, I still haven't received the invitation. Perhaps it got lost, or maybe it hasn't been sent yet. I just want to know the date so I can free up the day." Mrs. Henson hesitated, but then softened. "The wedding is scheduled for June 15th. That's 3 weeks from now. At the Red Rocks. Do you know the place?" I nodded. Red Rocks was a popular wedding venue, a beautiful estate overlooking the mountains 20 miles out of town. "Thank you," I said. And after a moment's silence, I added, "Have the invitations been sent out yet?" "Yes, last week. So I really wasn't invited. It wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. My daughter made a conscious decision not to have me at her wedding." On the way home, I stopped at the curb. My hands shook as I tried to smoke, an old habit I'd given up 15 years ago at Margaret's insistence. The lighter fell out of my fingers. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. What had I done wrong? Where had I made an irreparable mistake? I tried to remember the moment our relationship with Iris had finally broken down. After Margaret's death, I had invited Iris to stay with Aunt Susan, Margaret's sister, in Salt Lake City for a while. I thought it would be easier for her to cope with her grief away from home, where everything reminded her of her mother. Maybe she took it as a desire to get rid of her? Or when I couldn't make it to her college graduation because of a serious mine accident that required my presence? Or was it the fact that I rarely talked about my feelings, about how much I missed Margaret, how afraid I was of losing my daughter too? I'd tried several times over the past few years to mend the relationship, inviting Iris to dinner when she came to Elko, sent gifts for birthdays and Christmas. Once I even went to Reno to visit her unannounced. She barely let me in the door and sat on her cell phone the whole time I was there. When I got home, I pulled a folder of papers out of the safe. Margaret's life insurance policy, which paid out a substantial sum after her death. The trust documents I'd set up for Iris. A will that would have allowed her to inherit my business and home. I always thought that providing financial security for my daughter was an act of love, but maybe she needed something else. Something I didn't know how to give. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't impose on the wedding if Iris didn't want me to, but at least I'll get to see the man she's going to marry, see what kind of man he is if he's worthy of my daughter. After a few calls to people I know in Elko, I find out that Randall Withrow works at the city hospital as an X-ray technician. He's 28 and moved to Elko 3 years ago. His reputation is good, polite, professional, no bad habits. He and Iris met when she came to visit a high school friend, and they'd maintained a long-distance relationship ever since, until 6 months ago when she decided to move back to Elko and take a job at the local tourist office. This was news to me. Iris had returned to her hometown and hadn't even called her father. I felt like a ghost wandering the edges of my own daughter's life, watching from afar but unable to touch, to be heard. Well, if it was her choice, I should respect it. But then, why does it hurt so much? Saturday was unexpectedly cool for late May in Nevada. I was fixing up the old Ford in the garage when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I wasn't expecting a visit. I had almost no friends left, and the rare customers who contacted me directly usually called ahead. I wiped my hands with a rag and stepped out into the driveway. In front of me stood a young man in his 30s, tall, thin, with a neat haircut and thin-rimmed glasses. He shifted nervously from foot to foot, holding a folder of papers. "Mr. Cobb? Eugene Cobb?" he asked. "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" "My name is Randall Withrow." "Yeah." He hesitated, as if searching for words. "I'm your daughter's fiancée, Iris." What a meeting. A future son-in-law showing up uninvited. I studied his face, trying to see something in it that would explain Iris's choice. He looked pleasant enough, but a little nervous, maybe even scared. "I see," I said after an awkward pause. "Well, congratulations. Would you like to come in?" Randall clearly hadn't expected such a calm welcome. He nodded and followed me into the house. My living room hadn't seen a guest in months, and I realized how uncomfortable it looked. No furniture, no flowers, dusty photos on the mantelpiece. The home of a bachelor who'd long ago stopped caring about comfort. "Coffee?" I offered, pointing Randall to the couch. "Yes, please, if you don't mind." I left for the kitchen, leaving him alone. While making coffee, I wondered what could have brought him here. Iris definitely didn't send him to invite me to the wedding. Maybe he wanted to meet the bride's father out of politeness. But then, why did he look so nervous? When I returned with 2 cups of coffee, Randall was sitting studying Iris's high school graduation picture. "She's changed a lot since then," he said as I set the cups on the table. "How long have you two been together?" I asked, sitting down in the chair across from him. "Almost 2 years. We met when she came to Elko to visit Jessica Payne. They went to school together. I was X-raying Jessica after a minor bicycle accident." "And how did you convince Iris to come back to Elko? She always said she hated that town." Randall smiled slightly, as if the memory was a pleasant one. In fact, she'd suggested it herself. Said Reno was too noisy and she wanted a quieter life. Of course, it hadn't been easy. She'd had to quit her job at a travel company where she'd had good prospects. But she found a similar position here at the local tourist office. I sipped my coffee, mulling over what I'd heard. So it wasn't just the guy. Something had made Iris change her mind about our boring backwater, as she'd always called Elko. "Mr. Cobb," Randall set the cup on the table and straightened up. "I didn't just come to meet you. I have a proposition, or rather, a request." "I'm listening." Randall pulled several sheets of paper out of a folder, printouts of calculations and estimates. "Iris and I are planning a wedding. As you may know, it's scheduled for June 15th. "Yes," I heard. I nodded, trying to keep my voice neutral. He continued, "The thing is, Iris dreams of having a beautiful wedding. I would love to give it to her, but," he ran his hand nervously through his hair, "the reality is that we can't afford it, at least not right now." He handed me the first sheet of paper, the estimated wedding costs. I quickly looked over the figures. Red Cliffs Manor, catering for 100 people, photographer, musicians, decorations, dress. The sum at the end was impressive. "It's Pretty ambitious, I remarked. Iris has always dreamed of having a wedding like this, Randall said with a note of apology in his voice. And I want her to be happy. But my salary as an X-ray technician, while good, doesn't cover that kind of expense all at once. And her job at the travel office? I understand, I interrupted him. What's your point? Randall took a deep breath. We have two options. Either we postpone the wedding for a couple years until we have enough money saved up, or... He looked me straight in the eye. Or I'd like to ask you for a loan. I'll pay it all back, with interest if necessary. Here's my payment plan. He handed me a second sheet, a monthly payment schedule for 3 years. I've done some research, he continued. I know your business is stable and successful. I know it's a lot of money for you, but it's an opportunity for me to make Iris happy. She deserves a beautiful wedding after all she's been through. I silently studied the documents, pondering his words. This young man had come to me, a near stranger, asking for a large sum of money that required a certain amount of courage or desperation. Does Iris know you're here? I asked finally. Randall shook his head. No, and I'd rather she didn't find out. At least not until after the wedding. He hesitated for words. She's very proud. And you two have a complicated relationship, I understand. She rarely speaks of you, but when she does... Anyway, she wouldn't approve of me coming to you for help. Why did you decide to come to me? There are banks, credit organizations. I tried, Randall answered. I've been turned down in several places because I already have a student loan. And the interest rates they're offering me, he shook his head, we'd be paying it off in 10 years. He was quiet for a moment, then added, and also, you're her father. I thought you might want to be a part of this big day, even if she's not ready to admit it. His words touched something deep inside me. I put the papers aside and stood up, walking over to the window. Beyond the dusty glass, I could see the mountains in the distance, the same ones where Margaret and I and little Iris and I used to picnic on weekends. Randall, I said without turning around, do you love my daughter? More than anything in the world, he answered without hesitation. And you're sure you're willing to take on such a debt for one day? It's not just one day, he objected. It's the beginning of our married life. And it's not just the wedding. Iris has been through a lot. Losing her mother, having a difficult relationship with you, failures in previous relationships. I want this day to be perfect for her, to make her feel special, loved. I turned and looked at him carefully. There was sincerity in his eyes. Either he really did love Iris as much as he said he did, or he was a great actor. What if I just gave you the money? No strings attached? Randall frowned. I can't accept such a gift. It's not right. I want to be the one to provide for Iris, even if I need help at first. I don't take the easy way out, Mr. Cobb. I like his answer. Maybe this guy really is a worthwhile man. All right, I said, returning to the chair. I'll give you the money for the wedding, but with a few conditions. What are they? Randall asked warily. First, no interest. You'll pay back exactly the amount I give you. Second, I pointed to his payment schedule. Let's make the payments smaller, but over 5 years instead of 3. It'll be easier on you. Randall looked surprised. That's very generous of you. But why? Because I want you and Iris to get off to a good start, so that you don't start married life under financial strain. And the third condition? He asked, clearly expecting a catch. Iris really mustn't know that the money came from me, at least not until after the wedding. I don't want her to feel obligated or think I'm trying to buy her affection. Randall nodded with visible relief. I agree. Thank you, Mr. Cobb. You have no idea how much this means to us. Call me Eugene, I said, extending my hand. We're almost related after all. We shook hands, and I could see that the tension had finally left his face. How do you plan to explain the sudden appearance of the money to Iris? I asked. I'll tell her I took out a loan from the bank. She knows I tried to do that. I'll actually take out a small loan for other purposes so that I'll have the documents if she asks." "Reasonable," I agreed. "Now let's discuss the details. How do I transfer the money to you?" We spent the next hour discussing practical matters. Randall showed me an estimate prepared by a wedding agency called Eternal Love. The owner of the agency, Ellen Bishop, was handling all the details of the organization. "Ellen is a wonderful organizer," Randall said. "She offered us a turnkey package that included everything: venue, decorations, food, music. Iris loves her ideas." "We could arrange for me to pay the agency directly," I suggested. "It would be easier and safer for everyone." Randall agreed, and we decided that I would contact Ellen on Monday, introducing myself as a family friend who wanted to give a gift to the young people. When all the details were agreed upon, Randall visibly relaxed. He even accepted the offer of a glass of whiskey, an expensive single malt I was saving for special occasions. "To your health, Eugene," he said, raising his glass, "and to Iris's happiness." I nodded, sipping the whiskey. A warmth rose in my throat, reminding me of the times when Margaret and I sometimes had that luxury after a particularly hard day. "Randall," I began after a pause, "may I ask? What did Iris say about me?" The young man hesitated, clearly not wanting to hurt my feelings. "Not much, to be honest. Mostly about how hard it was after her mother died. She said that you were, distant, absorbed in your work, that she felt like she'd lost both her parents at once." I nodded. It was painful to hear, but fair. "She's right. I had failed. Couldn't be the father she needed at the time. If I may say," Randall began gently, "I don't think Iris fully understands what you've been through either. Losing your wife, being left alone with a teenage child. That must have been incredibly hard." "That's no excuse," I shook my head. "I was an adult. I should have handled it better." "Maybe. But you're human too," Randall finished his whiskey. "You know, I lost my father when I was 20. Lung cancer. The last months were horrible. I just started medical school and I felt helpless because I was supposed to be a doctor, saving people, and I couldn't save my own father." "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I mean, I understand how grief can be paralyzing, make you pull away from everyone, even those closest to you. I think Iris will realize that someday too." We were silent for a moment, each of us absorbed in our own thoughts. "One more question, if you don't mind," I said. "Why didn't Iris invite me to the wedding? I realize that our relationship isn't perfect, but still." Randall sighed. "We argued about it. I said you should be invited, that it was important. But Iris, she's stubborn, said she didn't want the day to be marred by tension between you two. That it's easier to pretend you're not here than to pretend to be a happy family in front of the guests." His words were like a punch in the butt. What did I expect, though? That years of estrangement could be overcome with one wedding invitation? "I did send you an invitation," Randall admitted quietly. "Secretly from Iris. It should arrive one of these days." "Thank you," I said, touched by his gesture. "But if Iris doesn't want to see me, I won't impose." "I was hoping you'd come," Randall said. "Maybe when Iris sees you there, she'll realize that you really care about her. Or maybe she'll make a scene at the wedding," I grinned bitterly. "No, Randall, I'll help with the money, but I'll keep a low profile. It's better for everyone." By the time Randall left, it was evening. We agreed I'd wire the first payment to the agency on Monday after I spoke to Ellen Bishop. "Thank you again, Eugene," he said, shaking my hand in farewell. "You don't know how grateful I am." "Take care of Iris," I said. "That's all I ask in return." As his car turned the corner, I went back inside and poured myself another whiskey. I thought about the kind of man Randall was, a straightforward, honest man, willing to ask for help for the happiness of the woman he loved. Perhaps my daughter had made the right choice. The next day, I received my wedding invitation. A simple white envelope with gold embossing. Inside was an elegant card with the names of Iris Cobb and Randall Withrow, the date and time of the ceremony. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, running my finger over the embossed letters of my daughter's name. Then I put it on the mantelpiece, next to Margaret's picture. I'm not going to this wedding, but I will do everything I can to make this day the kind of day my daughter has dreamed of. On Monday, I called Ellen Bishop from the Eternal Love Agency and made an appointment. We discussed all the details and I transferred the full amount for the wedding package, even adding a little extra for unexpected expenses. Ellen was pleasantly surprised by this generous gift and promised that the wedding would be flawless. June 15th was cloudless and hot, as it often is in Nevada in early summer. I spent the morning going through my sparse closet in search of a suitable suit. The choice was a navy blue one that I'd only worn a couple times in recent years. It had been hanging in a case, waiting for a special occasion, and now it was my daughter's wedding. For 2 weeks after Randall's visit, I pondered whether to go. On the one hand, I knew Iris didn't want to see me. On the other, I'd paid for this wedding, and some part of me wanted to see what the ceremony would look like from afar. Not to reproach my daughter for her generosity, but just to keep the image of Iris in her wedding dress, happy, starting a new life in my mind. After all, I had a formal invitation. Randall had sent it secretly from Iris, but it was still a formal invitation. I figured I'd keep a low profile, sit somewhere in the back row, and then leave quietly after the ceremony without attracting attention. Maybe Iris wouldn't even notice my presence among the hundreds of guests. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, tying my tie. My hands trembled slightly. The last time I'd worn a suit was at a friend's funeral 2 years ago. Before that, Margaret's funeral. Festive occasions were rare in my life. You'd be proud of her, Margot, I thought, looking at the picture of my wife. She's grown up to be a beautiful and strong woman, despite everything she's been through, despite me. Red Rocks Manor was 20 miles from town, perched on a hill overlooking the mountains. I left early so I wouldn't be late. On the way, I stopped at a flower store and bought a small bouquet of white lilies, Margaret's favorite. Not for Iris. I knew it would be inappropriate to give her flowers, but to put on my wife's grave on the way back. A kind of way to include her on the big day. The driveway to the estate was already filled with guests' cars. I parked at the very end, hoping to go unnoticed. As I got out of the car, I immediately recognized the magnitude of the celebration. A huge white tent decorated with fresh flowers and ribbons was erected over the lawn in front of the main building. Waiters in white gloves scurried among the guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvre. A string quartet played something classical and peaceful. Everything looked exactly as we'd discussed with Ellen Bishop. Sophisticated, elegant, no frills, but tasteful. I noticed the gift table, already littered with boxes and holiday wrapping. My gift was too big to fit on that table, but only Randall and I knew that. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and slowly made my way toward the ceremony site. Rows of white chairs were arranged in front of a flowered archway. The guests gradually took their seats. I didn't recognize most of them, apparently Iris's friends from Reno or Randall's colleagues from the hospital. Choosing a seat in the very last row, I sat down and waited for the ceremony to begin. My heart was beating faster than usual. For the first time in years, I felt a mixture of excitement and hope. Perhaps this day would be a new beginning, not only for Iris, but for our relationship. A string quartet played the wedding march, and all heads turned toward the beginning of the aisle between the rows. The first to appear were the bridesmaids in long blue dresses. Behind them was Randall, in an elegant dark suit, holding the hand of an older woman I didn't know, probably his mother. And then, finally, Iris appeared. She was beautiful in a white dress with a long train. She was led down the aisle by a middle-aged man I vaguely remembered. Margaret's brother, Iris's uncle, I think. My daughter was being married off by her uncle, not her father. It stung, but I reminded myself that I had agreed to be invisible that day. The ceremony was short and touching. The young priest spoke of love and fidelity, of the importance of supporting each other in times of need. Iris and Randall exchanged vows, and when they kissed, the guests broke into applause. I clapped along with everyone else, feeling a lump rise to my throat. My little girl, whom I had once taught to ride a bike, was now someone's wife. Time flows mercilessly, disregarding our mistakes and regrets. After the ceremony, the guests headed to the buffet tables and the newlyweds stayed behind to take pictures. I decided it was a good moment to discreetly leave. I was just getting up from my seat when I heard a woman's voice. "Mr. Cobb? Eugene Cobb?" I turned around. Standing in front of me was Ellen Bishop, the wedding planner. "Yes, that's me. How nice of you to come," she smiled. "I have to say, the wedding turned out beautifully because of your generosity." "Quiet, please," I asked, looking around. "No one must know I'm involved." Of course," she winked conspiratorially. "But I wanted to thank you personally, and to say that your daughter looks like a real princess today." "Yes, she does," I agreed. "Won't you join us for dinner? We're about to start seating the guests." I shook my head. "No, I was just about to leave. I'd seen enough of the ceremony." Ellen looked disappointed. "But don't you want to congratulate the newlyweds? I'm sure Iris would be pleased." "Eugene?" It was a voice I would have recognized out of 1,000. I slowly turned around and saw Iris standing a few steps away from me. Her face expressed shock and disbelief. "What are you doing here?" she asked, and there was no joy in her voice, only cold surprise. "Hello, Iris," I said, trying to smile. "You look beautiful. Congratulations on—" "I asked what you were doing here," she interrupted me, raising her voice. People around me started to turn around. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. "I have an invitation," I said, pulling a card out of my jacket pocket. "I didn't invite you," Iris snapped back. "Never." Ellen Bishop looked embarrassed. "Iris, my dear, there may have been some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," my daughter cut her off. "I know exactly who I invited to my wedding and who I didn't." She turned to me again. "You have no right to be here. Go away." Randall came up to us, alarmed by the raised tones. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing from me to Iris. "My father," Iris spat out the word as if it were bitter, "has shown up uninvited." "Iris, maybe we—" "No, Randall, I don't want him here. This is our day, and I'm not going to let him ruin it." Randall looked confused. He gave me a guilty look, but he didn't say anything. I understood his predicament to cross a bride on her wedding day, especially when it was her father with whom she had a complicated relationship. He was between a rock and a hard place. "Iris," I said quietly, "I didn't mean to ruin your day. I just wanted to see you get married. I was even going to leave before the banquet." "I wish you hadn't come at all," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "For 15 years you've been a non-participant in my life, and now you want to play the caring daddy? I'm sorry, but you're too late. I grew up without you, and today I'm getting married without you. Go away." She almost shouted the last word, attracting the attention of everyone around her. There was an awkward silence. I felt dozens of looks on me, sympathetic, curious, judgmental. "If that's what you want," I said, trying to keep my dignity, "I'll leave." "That's exactly what I want," Iris said, crossing her arms over her chest. I nodded, turned, and walked toward the exit. I could feel the stares of the guests at my back, but I didn't turn around. Only at the car did I allow myself to stop and take a deep breath, trying to cope with the emotions raging inside. Humiliation, anger, disappointment, pain. It all blended into a tight lump lodged somewhere in my chest. I got in the car and started the engine, but I didn't start right away. I needed to calm down so I could drive safely. In the rearview mirror, I saw Randall running toward my car. I rolled down the window. "Eugene," he said, out of breath, "I'm terribly sorry about what happened. I didn't know Iris would react that way." "Don't apologize," I replied. "It's my fault. I shouldn't have come. But you had an invitation, which I sent." He paused, obviously remembering that he'd done it secretly from his fiancée. "Exactly. And we both knew Iris didn't want to see me. I was just hoping—" "Never mind. Go back to your wife, Randall. Don't keep her waiting on a day like this." "But what about—" He hesitated, clearly not wanting to mention the money, but worried about our arrangement. "It's still on," I said. "I keep my word." He nodded with relief. "Thank you, Eugene. And I apologize again. Maybe Iris will understand someday." "Maybe," I answered without much hope. "Now go. Your wife is waiting." Randall nodded and ran back toward the manor. I pulled onto the road and headed toward town, but after a mile, I pulled over to the side of the road and shut off the engine. Iris's words echoed in my head. "For 15 years, you've been virtually absent from my life." Was she right? Yes, I hadn't been a perfect father since Margaret's death. I'd immersed myself in work, trying to dull my own pain, but I'd always provided for her financially, paid for college, helped with her first apartment in Reno. Isn't that sharing? Isn't that how fathers of my generation express love? But deep down, I knew that's not what Iris needed. She needed a father who would hold her when she cried for her mother, who would talk about her feelings, not hide them behind a mask of stoicism, who would teach her not only how to change the oil in her car, but how to deal with loss and pain. I wasn't that kind of father. I didn't know how to be one, and now it was too late to change anything. I pulled out my cell phone and found Ellen Bishop's number. She answered after the second ring. "Mr. Cobb, is everything all right?" "No, Miss Bishop, I'm not," I answered. "I want to cancel all payments for the wedding." "What?" Ellen sounded shocked. "But why? The ceremony has already taken place. The guests have already gathered for the banquet." "Did you hear what my daughter said? She doesn't want me to be a part of her wedding. No way. Not even financially." "Mr. Cobb, I understand you're upset, but this is going to cause a huge problem. The vendors have already performed their services. They're expecting payment." "It's not my concern," I said sternly. "I paid for the wedding as a gift. But if my gift isn't needed, I'll take it back." "But that would put the newlyweds in a terrible position. They won't be able to pay all the bills right now." "They have options," I replied. "They could take out a loan from the bank, like Randall had originally planned, or they could ask other guests for help. They have 100 guests, many of whom look quite wealthy." Ellen sighed. "Mr. Cobb, I ask you to reconsider. What happened is unpleasant, of course, but—" "Miss Bishop," I interrupted her, "I've made up my mind. Cancel the payments. If you don't, I'll contact the bank and dispute the transactions as fraudulent." There was a pause. Then Ellen said, "Okay, I will honor your request, but I think you're making a mistake." "Maybe," I replied. "Not the first time." I ended the call and leaned back in my seat, feeling strangely empty. Part of me knew I was being petty and vindictive. The other part screamed that it was fair. Why should I pay for a wedding I'd been publicly kicked out of? Half an hour later, the phone started ringing off the hook. Ellen Bishop, Randall, unfamiliar numbers, probably service providers demanding an explanation. I turned off the sound and put the phone on the passenger seat. I imagined what was happening at the wedding now. Ellen gathers all the vendors and informs them that there will be no payment. The caterers, the musicians, the photographers all demand money immediately or they will stop working. Iris is in tears. Randall is in a panic trying to find a solution. This should have brought me satisfaction, but all I felt was emptiness. I started the car and drove back to town. On the way, I passed the cemetery where Margaret was buried. I stopped, took out the bouquet of white lilies I had bought that morning, and walked to her grave. "I'm sorry, Margot," I said as I placed the flowers on the headstone. "I've ruined everything. Again." When I got home, the first thing I did was pour myself a whiskey. Good, expensive whiskey that I'd been saving for special occasions. My daughter's wedding was supposed to be such an occasion, but instead it turned into another demonstration of my failure as a father. I sat back in my chair staring at my phone, which was turned off. It must have been bursting with calls and messages. I finally decided to turn it on, preparing for the worst. 27 missed calls, 15 from Randall, 10 from Ellen Bishop, 2 from Iris. The messages were mostly from Randall. "Please call me back. We need to talk. What's going on? Suppliers demand payment immediately. Iris is hysterical. I'm begging you, Eugene, don't do this." There was one message from Iris, sent 15 minutes ago. "We need to talk. Immediately." Before I could read it, the phone rang again. It was Iris. I took a deep breath and answered. "Yes. What did you do?" Her voice shook with rage. "You canceled the wedding payments? Is this your revenge for me kicking you out?" "You said you didn't want me to be a part of your wedding," I answered calmly. "I was just honoring your wish." "You—" She choked with indignation. "You know very well that I didn't know you were involved financially. Randall told me everything. How could you do such a thing on my wedding day? How could you kick your own father out of the ceremony?" I asked, feeling my anger rising. "Publicly humiliate him in front of all the guests? You weren't invited." "I was. I have an invitation that Randall sent. Your husband wanted me there." "Randall had no right to decide that for me." "Did you have the right to decide for him who in his family to invite and who not to invite? Because as far as I know, his father's dead too, but his mother was at the ceremony. Why does your loss give you the right to deny me the right to participate in the big day of your life?" There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Iris said in a voice full of cold fury, "Turn the charges back on. Now." "No," I replied. "I won't pay for a gala where I'm not welcome." "Then I'll sue you." "On what grounds?" I grinned. "You don't have any documents to prove that I had to pay for your wedding. It was a gift that I have the right to refuse." You're just a petty, mean old man," Iris said. "I always knew you cared for no one but yourself." "If I only cared about myself, I wouldn't have spent thousands of dollars on the wedding of a daughter who didn't even want me there." Silence again. I could hear Iris breathing heavily. "What do I need to do to get you to return the payments?" she finally asked. "Nothing," I answered. "I'm not going back. You've made it clear that you don't want me in your life. I just respect your decision. Completely." "This is blackmail." "No, Iris. It's a consequence. Your decision's in mine. For 15 years we've lived apart. Today you put an end to our relationship. I just accepted it. Randall said you agreed to help because you wanted me to have the wedding of my dreams," she exclaimed. "Was that a lie?" "No, it wasn't a lie. I really did want it, but I also hoped that someday we could repair our relationship. Today you showed me that's not going to happen, so why should I keep pretending?" Sobs could be heard in the receiver. Iris was crying. "You ruined the most important day of my life," she said through her tears. "I'll never forgive you for that." "Add that to the list of things you won't forgive me for," I said tiredly. "It was already long enough." She hung up. I leaned back in my chair, finishing my whiskey. The phone rang again. Randall. I didn't answer it. Instead, I texted him, "The conversation with Iris is over. My decision won't change. Good luck." I stayed up most of the night. After talking to Iris on the phone, I turned off my cell phone and sat in the darkness of the living room, remembering every word I had spoken, every moment of the wedding ceremony, regretting and justifying my act at the same time. In the morning, I turned on my cell phone. There were 32 more missed calls and a slew of messages from Randall, from Ellen Bishop, from several unfamiliar numbers. From Iris was the last message sent at 2 a.m. "Randall and I are coming to see you tomorrow. Get ready to explain yourself." I didn't answer any of the messages, didn't return any of the missed calls. Instead, I did what I'd done every morning for the past 30 years. I drove to the workshop. Work had always been my salvation when my personal life was cracking at the seams. Grayson greeted me with surprise. "Boss, I didn't expect to see you today. Wasn't your daughter's wedding yesterday?" "Yes," I answered briefly, walking to my desk. "What are our orders for today?" Grayson realized from my tone that it was inappropriate to ask, and he silently held out a file folder. I plunged into my work, trying not to think about yesterday, about Iris's words, about broken dreams. Around noon, two men burst into the workshop, Iris and Randall. My daughter looked exhausted and furious at the same time. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed a sleepless night, and her movements had the nervous energy of someone on the verge of a breakdown. Randall stayed behind her, his face a mixture of guilt and anxiety. "We need to talk," Iris said, ignoring the surprised looks from my coworkers. "Now." I nodded, rising from my desk. "Let's go to my office." My office was a small room at the back of the workshop, separated from the main room by a glass partition. Not the most private place to talk, but the best available. As soon as the door closed behind us, Iris exploded. "How could you? How could you humiliate me like that in front of all the guests?" I sat down at the table, gesturing for them to take the chairs across from me. Randall lowered himself into one of them, and Iris remained standing with her arms crossed over her chest. "I'd like to ask you the same question," I said calmly. "How could you humiliate your father by kicking him out of the wedding in front of everyone?" "You weren't invited," she exclaimed. "You had no right to be there." "I had an invitation," I objected, "from your husband." Iris turned to Randall, her eyes narrowed. "Was it true?" Randall waved his hands helplessly. "Yes, I sent him an invitation. I thought it was right to invite your father to our wedding." "You did it behind my back," Iris hissed, "knowing I didn't want you to." "I was hoping you two could make up," Randall said quietly. "That the wedding would be a new beginning for both of you." Iris shook her head, then turned to me again. "Even if you had an invitation, that doesn't give you the right to cancel payments and ruin the whole wedding. Do you have any idea what happened after you left? It was a nightmare." I remained silent as I looked at my daughter. She reminded me so much of Margaret at that moment, the same stubborn tilt of her head, the way she pressed her lips together when she was angry. "Everything was perfect," Iris continued, her voice shaking with restrained emotion. "A beautiful ceremony, a lovely dinner, our first dance. And suddenly, in the middle of the evening, the vendors come up to us one by one and demand payment. They say all payments have been canceled. The musicians left right during the dance. The photographer took all the memory cards and refused to give back the pictures. The catering stopped serving tables. It was... She couldn't finish the sentence, tears rolling down her cheeks. Randall stood up and put his arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her. "We had to borrow money from the guests," he said, looking at me reproachfully. "Collecting cash, whoever could give what they could. It was humiliating, Eugene, for all of us. I felt a prick of conscience, but I suppressed it. They both didn't come here to apologize, they came here for money, and I wasn't going to pretend I was wrong." "Well," I said, leaning back in my chair, "now you know what it's like to be publicly humiliated." "So this was revenge?" Iris's eyes widened in shock. "You ruined our wedding because of your resentment." "I didn't ruin your wedding," I answered. "I simply refused to pay for it after my daughter made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me." "But I didn't know you were paying for the wedding," Iris exclaimed. "How was I supposed to know?" I shifted my gaze to Randall. "Tell her." Randall looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. He slowly let go of Iris's shoulders and took a step back. "Randall," Iris turned to him. "What is he talking about?" Randall took a deep breath. I went to your father before the wedding, asked him for financial help. What? Iris looked like she'd been punched. When was this? Why didn't you tell me? About 3 weeks ago, Randall answered, avoiding her gaze. I knew you wanted a beautiful wedding, but we couldn't afford it. The banks were denying credit because of my student debt. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to turn to your father. Behind my back, Iris said bitterly. Yes, Randall admitted. I knew you wouldn't approve, but I wanted you to have the wedding of your dreams. Your father agreed to help. He paid for everything, the estate, the catering, the photographer, the musicians, everything. Iris turned to me, her face pale. Was it true? I nodded. Yes. Randall came to me with a fair offer. Either you put off the wedding for a few years until you'd saved enough money, or I help you now and he pays me back gradually. I agreed to help. No interest with a convenient repayment schedule. But why? Iris asked, and there was more confusion than anger in her voice. Why did you do it? We hadn't spoken in years. You've barely been a part of my life. Because you're my daughter, I answered simply. And I wanted you to have the wedding you dreamed of, even if you didn't want me there. Iris shook her head as if she couldn't make sense of what she was hearing. So, you knew all along that I didn't want you at the wedding, and you still agreed to pay for it. Yeah. And then you showed up even though you knew you weren't invited? I had an invitation from Randall, I reminded him. I wasn't going to stay for the banquet. I just wanted to see the ceremony, to see you in your wedding dress. And when I asked you to leave, you decided to retaliate by canceling all the payments. Her voice was strong again, with anger in it. I didn't think of it as revenge, I replied. I realized that you really didn't want anything to do with me, that all my attempts to make things work were futile. So why keep pretending? Why pay for the wedding of a daughter who hates me? I don't hate you, Iris said quietly. You don't? I raised an eyebrow. You've kept me at a distance for 15 years. You don't invite me to your wedding. You publicly humiliate me in front of 100 guests. If that's not hate, what is it? Iris slumped down in her chair, suddenly looking very tired. It's complicated. Explain it to me, I said. We finally have a chance to talk openly. So explain why you've been avoiding me for so long, pushing away all my attempts to get closer. She was silent for a long time, gathering her thoughts. Randall stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder for support. After my mother died, Iris finally said, I felt so lost. I was 15, just beginning to realize my own identity, and suddenly my world fell apart. My mom was dying a long and painful death, and it was like you weren't there. Physically, you were there, but emotionally, you weren't. You never talked about your feelings, never asked about mine. You just, functioned. Worked, came home, worked again. I listened in silence, letting her speak. When Mom died, Iris continued, I waited for you and me to grow closer. That grief would bring us together. But you went even deeper into yourself, into your work. You offered to send me to Aunt Susan's. It was like you wanted to get rid of me, the reminder of Mom. I thought it would be easier for you to deal with your grief away from home, where everything reminded you of Margaret, I said quietly. Maybe. But it seemed to me that you just didn't want to take care of me, that I was a burden you wanted to get rid of. I shook my head. That was never true, Iris. I know it now. But then, I was 15, I'd just lost my mom, and I felt like I was losing you too. We didn't talk. Behind the glass partition of the office, the life of the workshop was going on. Tools clattering, engines humming, employees talking. But here, in this small room, it was as if time had stopped. I didn't know how to talk about feelings, Iris, I said at last. I never could. Your mother was the one who expressed emotions in our family. I was practical, solved problems, provided for the family. When Margaret got sick, I did what I knew how to do, worked harder to pay for the best doctors, the best medicine. And when she died, I didn't know how to deal with the pain. how to talk about her, especially with you. You were so much like her. Every time I looked at you, I saw her eyes, her smile. I paused, feeling a lump come up in my throat. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 15 years. I tried to take care of you the best I could, I continued after a pause. Provided for you financially, paid for college, helped you with your first apartment. I thought that was enough, that was the manifestation of love. Money isn't love, Dad, Iris said quietly. I know now. But then, I was raised in a different time, in a different culture. My father never told me he loved me. He just worked from morning till night so we could have a home, food, clothes. It was his way of expressing care. Iris nodded, but her gaze remained cold. And yet, she said, coming back to the present, you shouldn't have canceled the wedding payments. It was cruel. Yes, it was, I agreed. I acted impulsively, out of resentment. You ruined the most important day of my life. Her voice was filled with anger again. The guests left early. Many were shocked to see us begging for money. Randall and I spent our wedding night dealing with angry vendors. Do you realize what you've done? Randall, who had been silent all this time, finally intervened. Eugene, I understand your resentment, but please return the payments. Iris and I are just beginning our married life. Debt for a wedding gone wrong is not a good start. I looked at my brother-in-law. He looked genuinely concerned, but I could also see calculation in his eyes. He'd come here not only for Iris, but also for the money. Well, that was fair. He'd always been straightforward about his financial motives. All right, I said after a long pause. I'll reinstate the payments, but not for you. For whose sake? Iris asked defiantly. For myself. I don't want to be the person who destroys other people's happiness out of revenge, even if it's the happiness of people who don't respect me. Iris snorted. You've always had a knack for making yourself look good. A noble father who forgives an ungrateful daughter. I don't make myself look noble, Iris, and I'm not apologizing. I'm just doing what I think is right. I always have. And that's why you're alone, she said coldly. You've always done what you thought was right, with no thought for the feelings of others. Even Mom, especially Mom. Her words hit me harder than a slap. I felt the blood rush from my face. What do you mean? You know, she looked me straight in the eye. You made her stop the chemo when she wanted to fight to the end. You decided it was right to let her die without pain, but sooner than she could have. You took away her last months of her life. You took away my last months with my mom. I felt the room begin to spin around me. That long-buried, deep-seated fear had always lived inside me, that I'd made the wrong decision, that I could have given Margaret more time. The doctor said there was no chance, I said quietly. That the chemo would only prolong her suffering, giving her no hope of recovery. And you believed them, Iris grinned bitterly. You, who always said that you should fight to the end, that you should never give up. You gave up for Mom. Randall looked shocked at the direction the conversation had taken. Iris, maybe this isn't the time. No, she interrupted him. It is. I've kept it to myself for 15 years. I've heard my mother crying at night because she didn't want to leave so early. How she told Aunt Susan that she was afraid to leave me with you because you don't know how to love truly. That you were always emotionally unavailable, even to her. Every word Iris said was like a knife to the heart. Did Margaret really think that? Was I so blind that I couldn't see her suffering? I loved your mother more than anything, I said, my voice trembling. I did everything I could to ease her pain. Perhaps, Iris softened a little, seeing my state of mind. But you did it your way, without asking what she wanted. You always thought you knew better. There was a grain of truth in what she said, and it stung the most. I had indeed often made decisions for others, believing I was seeing a clearer picture, that I was protecting them from a tough election. I'll restore payments, I said, bringing the conversation back to the present. I'll contact Ellen Bishop later today. But that's it. I won't try to be a part of your life anymore, Iris. It's obvious that my presence only hurts you. She nodded, not trying to object. Thank you. I'm sorry about what I said about Mom. It was cruel. It was the truth, I replied. At least it was your truth. And I appreciate your honesty, even if it's painful. Randall looked awkward, standing between us two people bound by blood, but so far apart. We should go, he said, taking Iris's hand. We need to settle things with the vendors. She nodded and stood up. At the door, Iris stopped and turned to me. You know what the saddest part is? I always wanted you to be proud of me. Even when I was mad at you, even when I kept my distance, I still hoped, somewhere deep down, to earn your approval, your love, but you never knew how to show it, and I was tired of waiting. With those words, she walked out, Randall following her, throwing me a guilty glance over his shoulder. I was alone in the silence of the study, feeling the last thread that had bound me to my daughter had broken. We had both told the truth, painful, brutal, but necessary. And that truth showed that we had no future as a family. Perhaps it's best for both of us. Iris can live her life without the shadow of the past, without the constant reminder of loss and disappointment. And me, well, I'm used to being alone, used to living with the ghosts of the past and the regrets of what could have been. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Ellen Bishop's number. It was time to fulfill my promise and reinstate the wedding payments. It would be my last gift to my daughter and the most expensive of all, because along with the money, I was giving away my last hope for reconciliation. It was a week after that conversation in the workshop. I kept my word and reinstated all payments for Iris's wedding. Ellen Bishop was grateful and promised to straighten out any problems with the vendors. I received no further calls or messages from my daughter or Randall. There was silence, definitive and strangely relieving. On Friday, I sat in my office reviewing the company's financial statements for the last quarter. The numbers were as stable as ever. My workshop had never pursued aggressive growth, but it provided reliable income and jobs for 15 people. I was proud of what I had built over 30 years, a small but respected business where quality and reliability were valued. I used to always think that one day I'd hand it all over to Iris. I imagined bringing her up to speed, teaching her everything I know. How she would bring a fresh perspective, maybe modernize some of the processes, expand the client base. It was a dream I had cherished all these years, even as our relationship grew increasingly cold. Now I realized it would never happen. Iris wasn't interested in my business. She didn't want to be part of the world I'd built. And it wasn't just our conflict. She had simply chosen a different path, a different life. I looked out the window at the mountains in the distance. What kept me here in Elko? The business I'd built with my own hands, habit, fear of change, or the hope that someday my daughter would come back and we could start over. That hope died the moment Iris said, "I'm tired of waiting." She voiced what we both felt, but were afraid to admit. Our relationship wasn't worth the mental effort we'd put into it. A toxic bond fueled only by a sense of duty and ghosts of the past. I picked up the phone and dialed Grayson, my chief engineer and most loyal employee. "Grayson, come to my office, please. We have an important matter to discuss." 5 minutes later, he was sitting across from me, watching curiously as I pulled a folder of documents out of the safe. "Remember we once talked about how you'd like to start your own business someday?" I asked. Grayson nodded. "Of course I remember. It's a long-time dream of mine, but I always thought the company would go to Iris." "Iris has other plans for her life," I said. "And I've decided it's time for a change. I want to offer you the chance to buy my business." Grayson's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? But I don't think I can afford that kind of money. We both know how much the company is worth." "I have an offer." I handed him the folder. "Take a look at these terms. The down payment will be 20% of the appraised value, You'll pay the rest out of the company's profits over 10 years. No interest, no middlemen, just you and me. Grayson flipped through the documents, his eyebrows rising higher and higher as he read. That's a very generous offer, Eugene. But why? Why now? I looked at the picture of Margaret on my desk. Because it's time to let go of the past and start living in the present. You deserve this business more than anyone else. You've put almost as much heart into it as I have. Grayson was silent for a moment, considering my words. Then he nodded slowly. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I won't let you down. I know, I smiled. And one more condition. You keep the jobs. These people are part of the family we've built here. Of course, Grayson said firmly. I would never do anything differently. We shook hands, sealing our unofficial pact. We'd sort out the formalities later with lawyers and accountants. But the important decision was made here and now. What are you going to do? Grayson asked. After the sale? I smiled, feeling oddly relieved, something I'd always put off for later. I sat at home in the evening looking through old photo albums, not just of Iris and Margaret, but earlier ones, from my youth, from trips I'd taken before I married. Among them was one particular photo, me, 20 years old, standing on the shore of Lake Tahoe with a homemade map in hand. On the back of the photo was an inscription in my hand. One day I will drive this entire route, all 10,000 miles. It was a dream of my youth, a big trip across America, ocean to ocean with stops at all the national parks. Margaret knew about this dream. We even planned to do it together when Iris grew up and became independent. But life had taken a different course. I pulled out a map of the United States and spread it out on the table. My finger traced the route I'd once planned from the Pacific to the Atlantic, through the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the Great Smoky Mountains, and dozens of other amazing places. Why not? What's keeping me going? The business will soon be in Grayson's capable hands. The house can be sold or rented out. Money isn't a problem. I've always lived modestly and set aside a significant portion of my income. I have enough money to travel for several years without worrying about finances. For the first time in a long time, I felt a rush of enthusiasm and anticipation of something new and exciting. It was like waking up after a long sleep. I sketched out a plan of action, close the deal with Grayson, get the house ready to sell, buy a reliable SUV, gather everything I needed for a long trip. In a month, 2 at the most, I'd be ready to hit the road. As I fell asleep that night, I smiled for the first time in a long time. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, the weight of unfulfilled hopes, disappointments, guilt. I was finally letting go of the past. The next weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. I made a formal agreement with Grayson to sell the business, hired a realtor to appraise and sell the house, bought a used but reliable Land Rover for the trip. Every day I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. From mutual acquaintances, I heard news about Iris and Randall. It seemed their marriage was going through some bad times. The scandal at the wedding had become a topic of discussion in Little Elko, and even though I had restored payments, the newlyweds' reputation had suffered. Many guests were shocked at the way the couple had raised money to pay for services during the celebration. In addition, they were in financial trouble. Although I had paid for the wedding, they had managed to borrow significant amounts from friends and relatives the night the payments were canceled. Now those debts had to be repaid. Plus, Randall was still paying off his student loans, and the radiologist's salary at the small Elko hospital wasn't that high. Iris, who worked in the travel office, didn't have much income either. I heard that she was looking for extra part-time work to help the family budget, but their relationship suffered the most from mutual recriminations. Iris couldn't forgive Randall for going behind her back and coming to me for help. Randall, for his part, felt that Iris was overreacting and didn't appreciate his attempts to provide her with a dream wedding. Their honeymoon, scheduled for August, had been postponed indefinitely due to financial difficulties. I felt no gloating upon learning this news, only sadness that history was repeating itself. Another family crumbling because of an inability to talk openly about problems and feelings. Perhaps Iris had inherited from me not only my stubbornness, but also my inability to express emotions, my inability to forgive. I ran into Randall in town one day. He looked tired and depressed with dark circles under his eyes. "Eugene," he nodded, clearly unsure of how to act. "Randall," I answered. "How's it going?" He shrugged. "I've been better. Work takes up a lot of my time. How about you?" "Selling the business," I said. "And the house. Going to be traveling for a while." Randall looked surprised. "Really? That's unexpected." "It's time for a change," I replied. "What about Iris?" His face tensed. She's doing okay, working hard." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "We're both trying to get on with our lives after everything that happened." I nodded, realizing there was a lot more behind those words than he was willing to admit. "Give her my best wishes," I said. Take care of each other." Randall looked at me in surprise, as if he'd expected accusation or rebuke rather than kind words. "Thank you, Eugene. Good luck with your travels." We parted, and I felt a strange calmness. No bitterness, no desire for revenge or to prove a point. Just an acceptance that some relationships can't be fixed, some wounds don't heal, and that's okay. In the last week before I left, I put my affairs in order. I closed my business-related bank accounts, handed over all the necessary paperwork to Grayson, signed a tentative agreement to sell a house with a young family that was moving to Elko from Salt Lake City. I also visited Margaret's grave, placing a bouquet of her favorite lilies on her headstone. "I'm going on the trip we dreamed of, Margot," I said, standing at the grave. "I only wish you could come with me, but I'll take pictures for you, and I'll tell you everything I see." The evening before I left, I sat on the front porch watching the sunset. The Land Rover was loaded with everything I needed for a long trip: tent, sleeping bag, camp kitchen, provisions, maps, guidebooks. On the passenger seat was a small photograph of Margaret, not to reopen old wounds, but as a reminder that I had once been loved and happy. There was the sound of a car pulling up. I tensed, recognizing Iris's car. She had come alone, without Randall. When she pulled up in front of the house, she sat behind the wheel for a long moment, as if gathering her strength. Then she got out and walked slowly up to the porch. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I answered without getting up. "Do you want to sit down?" She shook her head. "I won't be long. I heard you were leaving, selling the house and the business." "News travels fast in a small town," I remarked. "Yeah, I'm going traveling tomorrow. It's a long-time dream I've been putting off." Iris nodded, looking off into the distance, at the mountains painted pink by the sunset. "I'm happy for you. I really am." We were quiet for a moment. There were always those awkward pauses between us, when we didn't know what to say to each other, how to bridge the gap that separated us. "How are you?" I finally asked. "How are you and Randall doing?" She shrugged. "Difficult, but we'll get through it. I got a second job at the bookstore on weekends. Randall's moonlighting as an online counselor. We're getting out of debt, little by little." "That's good," I said, not knowing what else to say. "You know," Iris said suddenly, "I always thought you'd stay here forever, that this house, your workshop, was all you needed, that you weren't capable of change." "I thought that too," I admitted, "for a long time. But then I realized that I held on to it not because it made me happy, but out of fear. Fear of letting go of the past, fear of the unknown, fear of admitting that some things can't be fixed, no matter how hard you try." Iris looked at me carefully, as if seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," she said quietly. "We all change," I answered. "Sometimes it takes a strong push to see the need for change." She nodded, realizing that I was referring to our quarrel at the wedding and the subsequent conversation in the workshop. Where will you go? First west, to the coast, then south through California, Arizona, New Mexico, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, all the national parks I can, then east to the Atlantic Ocean. No set itinerary, no timetable, just, freedom. Sounds wonderful. I could hear the genuine envy in her voice. I've always dreamed of traveling like that. You're still young, I said. You'll have the opportunity to realize your dreams. Iris grinned bitterly. Right now it seems like a long way off. Randall and I are mired in debt and problems. Sometimes I think... She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Wondering if I've made the right choice. She nodded without looking at me. We were in such a hurry to get married. Maybe we should have waited, saved up some money, gotten to know each other better. You'll be fine, I said, though I wasn't really sure. Difficulties either make or break a relationship. It all depends on how you approach them. You sound like a greeting card, Iris grinned. I guess so, I agreed. But it's true. Your mom and I have been through some tough times too. There were times when it felt like everything was falling apart, but we persevered, because we decided that our love was worth the struggle. Iris looked at me in surprise. You and Mom fought? I've never heard you raise your voices at each other. We didn't yell, I said, but that doesn't mean there weren't conflicts. It's just that we learned to resolve them calmly, with respect for each other. She nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what it's all about. Randall and I, we both have a temper. We say things we regret. It's never too late to learn to listen to each other, I said. Iris suddenly laughed. This from the person who'd been emotionally unavailable my entire adult life. Ironic, don't you think? I smiled too, recognizing the validity of her words. Sometimes we're better at seeing the mistakes of others than we are at seeing our own. And sometimes it's easier to give advice than to follow it. We were silent again, but now the silence was comfortable, without tension. Well, Iris said at last, I won't keep you any longer. I just wanted to say goodbye. I wish you good luck. Thank you, I nodded. And good luck to you, Iris. With Randall, with work, with everything. She turned to leave, but stopped. You know, despite everything that's happened, I don't hate you. I never have. I didn't understand, and I was angry about it. I know, I said quietly. I didn't understand either. Both of us. Iris nodded, then walked over quickly and hugged me lightly, almost weightlessly. Before I could respond to the hug, she pulled away. Be happy, Daddy, she said, and walked quickly to her car. I watched her drive away and felt a strange mix of emotion, sadness at saying goodbye, relief that our last meeting had been peaceful, hope that maybe someday, when the wounds had healed, we could start over as adults, unburdened by past hurts. But even if that didn't happen, even if today's goodbye was final, I was ready to let go. To let go of my daughter, to let go of the past, to let go of my guilt and regrets. There was a new life ahead, new horizons, new possibilities. In the morning, I loaded the last of my belongings into the car, locked up the house, and gave the spare keys to a neighbor who promised to keep an eye on the property until the deal with the buyers was finalized. I got behind the wheel and started the engine. Before I drove off, I took one last look at the house where I'd lived most of my adult life, where I'd loved, lost, suffered, hoped. This house had witnessed the best and worst moments of my life. But now it was just a house, a building made of wood, brick, and glass. All the memories, all the emotions I was taking with me, not as a heavy weight, but as part of my experience, my story. I pulled onto the road that led from Elko west to the ocean, a road that symbolized a new beginning, freedom from the past, openness to the future. For the first time in years, I felt truly alive. For the first time in years, I was completely free. And somewhere behind me was Iris, in her little house on the outskirts of Elko, with the husband she had chosen, with the problems she had created, with the lessons she had yet to learn. I had hoped she would find her way, her freedom, her happiness. But now it was her path, not mine, her choice, her life, her responsibility. I turned on the radio and smiled as I heard an old song about the road and freedom. A fitting soundtrack for the beginning of a new chapter of life. For a man who had finally found the strength to let go of the past and move forward, toward the unknown, toward new horizons, toward his present self.